whispering through broken boards and empty tracks like it still remembered the trains that used to pass. Most people would have turned back the moment they saw the place, but she didn't at 20 years old. With nowhere left to go and nothing left to lose, she stood there staring at the old depot like it was the last door in the world that hadn't been slammed shut on her. The sign hanging crooked above the platform read Whitlock Junction, its paint chipped and fading as if time itself had tried to erase it, but never quite finished the job. The building leaned just slightly, tired but stubborn, like it refused to fall no matter how many winters had beaten down on it. Broken windows stared out like hollow eyes. The tracks were buried under years of rust and weeds, stretching into the trees before disappearing completely. She tightened her coat against the cold. It wasn't much of a coat, thin and worn at the sleeves, but it was all she had. A week ago, she had been sleeping behind a grocery store, counting the hours until morning just to stay warm. 2 weeks ago, she still believed things might turn around. But life had a way of stripping those beliefs down piece by piece until all that was left was survival. And then she saw the listing. $10. That was it. $10 for a forgotten train depot sitting on land nobody seemed to care about anymore. At first, she thought it had to be a mistake, maybe a joke someone posted online just to see who would fall for it. But something about it stuck with her. Maybe it was the price, or maybe it was the picture that came with it, the same broken building now standing in front of her. It didn't look like much, but it looked like something that could belong to someone again. She had exactly $13 in her pocket that day. $3 left after buying it. $3 in a place that nobody else wanted. People at the office didn't even bother hiding their amusement when she signed the papers. One man laughed under his breath and said she'd probably be back within a week asking how to return it. Another shook his head like he felt sorry for her, but not enough to say anything kind. She didn't argue. She didn't try to explain. She just signed her name, took the keys, and walked out with something she hadn't had in a long time. Ownership. It didn't matter that the roof sagged or that the doors barely closed. It didn't matter that the place looked like it had been abandoned for decades. For the first time in months, she had somewhere to go that no one could take away from her. Now she was here. Up close, the depot looked even worse than in the photos. The wooden platform was soft under her boots, damp from years of rain and neglect. One wrong step, and it felt like it might give way completely. The door creaked as she pushed it open, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the quiet woods around her. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old paper. Light slipped in through cracked windows, cutting across the room in pale lines. The waiting area was empty except for a few broken benches pushed against the walls. Paint peeled in long strips, revealing older layers beneath, like the building was shedding its past piece by piece. Somewhere deeper inside, something shifted, maybe a loose board settling, or maybe just the wind finding its way through the cracks. She stepped carefully, her boots stirring up small clouds of dust with every movement. It was quiet in a way that felt heavy, not peaceful. The kind of quiet that made you feel like you weren't really alone, even when you knew you were. Still, she kept going. There was a counter at the far end of the room, the old ticket booth. Its glass window was fogged and streaked, but still mostly intact. A small opening sat at the bottom, where tickets used to slide through to waiting passengers. Behind it, the space was darker, closed off from the rest of the depot. She stopped in front of it. For a moment, she just stood there, looking at her own reflection in the glass. A tired face stared back at her, eyes carrying more weight than they should at her age. She barely recognized herself anymore. Home, she said quietly, the word feeling strange on her tongue. It didn't sound right yet, but maybe it would. She walked around the side of the counter and found the narrow door that led into the booth. It was stiff like it hadn't been opened in years. She had to push harder than expected before it finally gave way with a sharp crack. Inside, the air felt different, colder, not just from the weather, but something else, something that made her pause without knowing why. The space was small, barely enough room to stand comfortably. Shelves lined the walls, most of them empty except for a few scattered papers that had curled with age. A rusted cash drawer sat beneath the counter, half open, as if someone had left in a hurry and never returned. She stepped inside anyway. The floor creaked under her weight, louder than before, echoing strangely in the tight space. She glanced around, taking it all in, trying to imagine what it must have been like when this place was alive. People talking, trains arriving, tickets being sold through that small opening. Now it was just her. And the silence. She moved toward the counter, brushing her fingers lightly across the surface. Dust clung to her skin instantly. She wiped it off on her jeans, then leaned forward to look through the glass into the empty waiting room beyond. That's when she noticed it. At first, it didn't make sense. It was small, almost hidden, tucked into the corner beneath the counter where the shadows were thickest. She might have missed it completely if the light hadn't shifted just enough through the broken window. A box? Old, wooden, and out of place in a room that had been stripped of almost everything else? Her heart started to beat a little faster. She crouched down slowly, the floor creaking again beneath her. The box was wedged tight against the wall, like someone had pushed it there deliberately. It didn't look like trash. It looked kept, forgotten maybe, but not thrown away. She reached out, hesitating just before her fingers touched it. There was no reason to be nervous. It was just an old box in an abandoned building she now owned. It could be empty, or filled with nothing but scraps and junk left behind by time. But something about it didn't feel empty. The air in the booth seemed to press in closer as she wrapped her fingers around the edge and pulled. It didn't move at first. She tried again, putting more effort into it this time, and slowly it slid free with a low scraping sound that echoed through the depot. Dust scattered into the air, catching the light as it rose. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the box in front of her. It was heavier than she expected and locked. She stared at it, her mind racing now. Who would lock something in a place like this and just leave it behind? What could possibly be inside that someone thought was worth hiding, even here? Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the loose boards and whistling through the cracks in the walls. She swallowed, her eyes fixed on the box. Then, almost without thinking, she noticed something else. A small key, not in the box, but taped carefully beneath the counter, just out of sight unless you were looking for it. Her breath caught as she reached for it, her fingers peeling it free from where it had been hidden for who knew how long. For a moment, she just held it in her hand, staring down at the box, her heart pounding louder than the wind outside. Then she slowly brought the key toward the lock. And just before it slid inside, she paused. Because suddenly she wasn't so sure she wanted to know what was waiting for her inside that forgotten ticket booth. Her hand hovered for a moment longer, the small key cold against her fingers. The wind outside pressed harder against the walls, making the whole depot groan like it was waking up after a long sleep. She let out a slow breath, steadying herself. "It's just a box," she murmured, more to calm herself than anything else. But even as she said it, she knew that wasn't true. Nothing about this place felt simple. She lowered the key and slid it into the lock. It fit perfectly. That alone made her pause again. The key hadn't been tossed aside or lost. It had been placed there, hidden but not too well hidden. Whoever left it wanted someone to find it, but maybe not just anyone. Her grip tightened as she turned the key. A soft click broke through the silence, sharper than it should have been in such a small space. For a second, she didn't move. Then slowly she lifted the lid. The hinges creaked, dry and stiff, as if they hadn't been opened in years. Dust shifted again, catching in her throat, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on what was inside. Not money, not anything shiny or valuable in the way people usually think, just papers. Stacks of them, tied together with thin, brittle string. Some were folded neatly, others worn at the edges like they had been handled too many times. On top sat a small bundle of envelopes, yellowed with age, each one carefully sealed. She blinked, confusion mixing with curiosity. "That's it?" she whispered. But even as disappointment tried to creep in, something else pushed it back. The way the papers were arranged, the care, the fact that they had been locked away at all. She reached in and picked up the top envelope. It felt fragile in her hands, like it might fall apart if she wasn't careful. There was no stamp, no address, just a name written across the front in faded ink. She turned it slightly, trying to make out the letters. It wasn't a name she recognized. That made sense, of course. This place had likely been abandoned long before she was born. Still, something about seeing a name there made the whole thing feel more real, like she had just stepped into someone else's story without meaning to. She hesitated before opening it. Part of her wondered if she even should. This was her building now, that much was true. But these letters clearly belonged to someone. Someone who had taken the time to hide them, to lock them away where no one else would easily find them. Or maybe where only the right person would? The thought made her shift slightly, uncomfortable. Right person, she muttered. That's not me. She had never been anyone's idea of the right person for anything, not lately. Still, her fingers moved almost on their own, sliding beneath the flap of the envelope and gently pulling it open. The paper inside was thinner than she expected, worn but still holding together. She unfolded it carefully, smoothing it out against her palm. The handwriting was neat, steady, old-fashioned. She started to read. At first, it didn't make much sense. The words felt distant, like they belonged to another time, another world. It spoke of trains arriving late, of weather turning bad, of long waits and longer nights. Simple things, everyday things for someone working in a place like this, but then the tone shifted. Subtle at first. A line about someone not showing up when they were supposed to. Another about strange sounds late at night, coming from the tracks even when no train was scheduled. The writer brushed it off in the beginning, calling it imagination, blaming it on being alone too long. She felt a small chill run through her, though the booth hadn't gotten any colder. She kept reading. The next letter was different, shorter, more rushed. The handwriting wasn't as steady anymore. It spoke about seeing something at the edge of the woods. A figure, maybe, or just a shadow moving where nothing should have been. Again, the writer tried to explain it away, but the words didn't carry the same confidence as before. She lowered the paper slightly, glancing over her shoulder even though she knew there was nothing there. The empty waiting room stared back at her. Still, the feeling lingered. She picked up another letter. This one wasn't sealed. It looked like it had been opened and closed many times. The edges were more worn than the others, the fold lines deep. She unfolded it. This time there was no attempt to sound calm. No effort to explain things away. The writer spoke directly, almost urgently, about something being wrong with the depot itself. Not just the building, but the place. Like something had settled into it over time. Something that didn't belong. Her grip tightened on the paper. She told herself it was just stories. Old fears written down by someone who had spent too much time alone in a quiet place. Anyone could start imagining things under those conditions. She knew that better than most. Nights out on the street had a way of playing tricks on your mind. Every sound felt bigger, every shadow darker. You started seeing patterns where there weren't any, hearing things that weren't real. This was no different. It couldn't be. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and set the letter aside. Just someone losing it, she said quietly. But her voice didn't sound convinced. Her eyes drifted back to the box. There were still more papers inside. And beneath them, something else. She reached in again, pushing aside the stack of letters until her fingers brushed against something harder. She pulled it out slowly, a small notebook. The cover was cracked, the edges worn down, but it was still intact. Unlike the loose letters, this felt more personal, more complete. She opened it to the first page. A name was written there. The same name from the envelope. Below it, a date. Her brow furrowed as she read it again. It didn't line up with what she expected. The date wasn't from decades ago like she had assumed. It was much more recent. Not yesterday, not even last year, but recent enough that it didn't feel like ancient history. That didn't sit right with her. She flipped through a few pages. The entries started off normal enough. Notes about repairs needed around the depot. Mentions of visitors who passed through, though they seemed few and far between. Small details that painted a picture of someone trying to keep the place running long after everyone else had forgotten it. Then the entries started to change, the same shift she had seen in the letters. Shorter sentences. More questions than answers. Mentions of things not adding up, of doors being found open when they had been locked. Of footsteps heard on the platform late at night even though no one was there. She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. A loud bang echoed from somewhere in the depot. She froze, For a moment, she couldn't even breathe. The sound had come from outside the booth, somewhere in the main room. It wasn't loud enough to be something breaking, but it wasn't soft either, like something had been knocked over or dropped. Her heart started pounding again, harder this time. "It's nothing," she whispered, though she didn't move. The wind, it had to be the wind. She closed the notebook slowly, her eyes fixed on the doorway. The depot had been empty when she walked in, she was sure of that. But now, standing there in the narrow booth with the old papers and the locked box, that certainty didn't feel as solid anymore. The floor creaked again. Not beneath her feet, somewhere just outside the booth. She held her breath, listening. Another creak followed, slower this time, like a careful step. Her mind raced, trying to find a reasonable explanation. Old buildings made noise. Wood shifted, things settled. But this sounded different. Measured, intentional, her gaze flicked to the small opening in the counter, the one where tickets used to pass through. From where she stood, she couldn't see much of the waiting area, just a narrow slice of it. Enough to notice movement if there was any. She took a small step back, the notebook still clutched in her hand. "Hello?" She called out, her voice tight. No answer. Only the wind, slipping through cracks and broken glass. And then, just as she started to convince herself she had imagined it, a shadow passed across the thin line of light visible through the opening. Her breath caught. Someone or something was in the depot with her. She didn't move at first. Her body stayed frozen, every muscle tight as her eyes locked onto that narrow strip of light. The shadow had been quick, but not quick enough to ignore. It had shape, it had weight. It wasn't just the wind playing tricks. Someone was out there. Her fingers tightened around the notebook, the dry cover pressing into her palm. For a second she thought about staying where she was, closing the booth door, pretending none of this was happening. But that thought didn't last long. Running had never solved anything for her. Slowly, carefully, she took a step toward the door of the ticket booth. The old wood beneath her boots creaked again, louder this time, and she winced at the sound. If someone was out there, they would know exactly where she was now. "Hello?" She called again, trying to keep her voice steady. Still no answer. She reached the door and paused, her hand resting on the edge. The air felt heavier now, like the depot itself was holding its breath. For a brief moment, she thought about the letters, the strange words written by someone who had stood in this same place, hearing things they couldn't explain. Her grip tightened. "This is my place now," she said under her breath, almost like a reminder. Then she pushed the door open. The waiting room stretched out in front of her, quiet and empty, just as it had been before. The broken benches, the peeling paint, the thin beams of light cutting through the dust. Nothing had changed, at least not in a way she could see. She stepped out of the booth, her eyes scanning every corner. The platform outside was visible through the cracked windows, still and lifeless. No movement, no sign of anyone. But the feeling didn't go away. That sense of being watched clung to her, settling deep in her chest. Her gaze drifted toward the far wall, where an old door hung slightly open. She was certain it had been closed earlier. She remembered noticing it when she first walked in, the way it leaned crooked in its frame. Now it stood ajar, just enough to reveal darkness beyond. A slow chill crept up her spine. "Wind," she said again, though it sounded weaker this time. Still, her feet carried her forward. Each step felt louder than the last, echoing through the empty depot as she moved closer to that door. The notebook was still in her hand, and without thinking she held onto it tighter, like it might offer some kind of protection. When she reached the door, she hesitated. The darkness on the other side wasn't complete. There was a faint hint of light, just enough to show that it led into a narrow hallway. Probably storage rooms or an office, something like that. Places she hadn't checked yet. Places someone could hide. She pushed the door open a little more. It creaked sharply, the sound slicing through the quiet. "Anyone there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper now. Nothing, just the same heavy silence. She stepped inside. The hallway was colder than the rest of the depot. The walls were closer, the air tighter. Old posters clung to the wood, their colors faded and peeling away. She could make out bits of old schedules, notices for trains that hadn't run in years. Her footsteps slowed, Halfway down the hall, she stopped. There was a door at the end, slightly different from the others, stronger, reinforced maybe. It didn't look like it belonged in a place this worn down, and it was closed. Unlike the others. Her eyes lingered on it, a quiet tension building in her chest. Behind her, the depot let out a low groan as the wind shifted again. She turned quickly, her heart jumping, but the hallway behind her was still empty. When she looked back, the door at the end seemed even more out of place. She walked toward it. Each step felt heavier now, like something inside her was warning her to stop. But curiosity pulled harder. The same force that had made her open the box, read the letters, keep digging when she could have walked away. She reached out and tried the handle. Locked. Of course it was. She let out a small breath, part relief, part frustration. For a moment she just stood there, staring at it. Then her mind shifted back to the booth, to the key taped beneath the counter, to the way it had been hidden but not completely. Her stomach tightened. What else is hidden here? She murmured. A faint sound echoed behind her, not a creak this time. Something softer, like a footstep. She spun around again, faster now, her pulse racing. "Stop!" she called out, the word sharper than she intended. "I know you're here," silence answered her. But it wasn't empty silence anymore. It felt like something was pressing against it, just out of reach. Her breathing grew uneven as she backed away from the locked door, her eyes darting along the hallway. Every shadow looked deeper now. Every corner felt like it could hold something waiting just out of sight. She forced herself to move, back toward the main room, back toward the light. When she stepped out of the hallway, the depot felt different again. The air had shifted, carrying a faint smell she hadn't noticed before. Not strong, not obvious, but there. Old metal and something else she couldn't quite place. Her eyes moved instinctively toward the ticket booth. The box was still there, open, the papers scattered slightly from where she had been searching through them. Everything looked the same, except for one thing, the notebook. It wasn't where she had left it. Her breath caught, she was sure of it. She had been holding it when she stepped into the hallway. She remembered the weight of it in her hand, the way her fingers had pressed into the cover. Now it was sitting on the counter inside the booth. Placed neatly, her heart pounded harder. "No," she whispered. She hadn't set it down. She would remember that. Slowly, she walked back toward the booth, her movements cautious, her eyes never leaving the notebook. The closer she got, the more certain she became. It had been moved, not fallen. Not slipped, moved. She stepped inside the booth again, the air feeling colder than before. For a moment, she just stared at the notebook. Then, with a shaking hand, she reached out and picked it up. The cover felt the same. The weight felt the same. But something about it was different. She opened it. The pages she had read before were still there. The same entries, the same uneven handwriting as it grew more frantic. But as she flipped further, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. New pages, not new as in fresh, but new to her. Pages she was certain she hadn't turned to earlier. Her fingers trembled slightly as she stopped and looked closer. The handwriting was the same, but the tone had changed again. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was warning. Her eyes moved quickly across the page, taking in the words. It spoke about someone else coming to the depot. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Someone who had found the same box, the same letters. Her chest tightened. The words felt too close now, too real. The entry ended abruptly, as if the writer had been interrupted. Her gaze dropped to the bottom of the page. There, in the same faded ink, was a line that made her breath stop. It wasn't a date. It wasn't a note about the trains or the weather. It was a sentence, written slower than the rest, clear, deliberate. It read that the next person who finds this needs to leave before nightfall. Her hands went cold as she stared at the words. Outside, the light had already started to fade. The words stayed in her head long after she lowered the notebook. Leave before nightfall. She looked up slowly, her eyes drifting toward the cracked windows. The light outside had shifted into that dull gray that came just before evening settled in. The trees beyond the tracks stood still, their bare branches like thin fingers reaching into the sky. "How much time?" she whispered, though no one answered. Her chest felt tight, caught somewhere between fear and something else she couldn't quite name. It wasn't just panic. It was the weight of knowing she had stepped into something unfinished. Something that had been waiting longer than she had been alive. Her grip tightened on the notebook again. The words didn't feel like a story anymore. They felt like instructions. She forced herself to breathe, slow and steady, the way she used to when nights felt too long and too uncertain. Back then, she had learned one thing the hard way. Fear didn't go away if you ran from it. It followed you, settled into your bones, waited for the next quiet moment to come back stronger. No more running, she said quietly. The depot creaked around her as if listening. She stepped out of the booth again, her movements quicker now, more focused. If someone had left that warning, if someone had hidden those letters in that notebook, then there had to be a reason. And if there was a reason, there had to be answers somewhere in this place. Her eyes went straight to the hallway, to that locked door. She didn't hesitate this time. Her boots echoed against the wooden floor as she crossed the waiting room, the sound sharper in the growing quiet. The wind outside had dropped, leaving the depot in a strange stillness that made every step feel louder. When she reached the hallway, she slowed again, but only slightly. The air inside felt colder than before, the narrow space holding onto the chill as if it didn't want to let it go. The old posters on the walls shifted faintly, brushing against the wood with a soft rustling sound. She moved past them, her eyes fixed on the door at the end. It looked the same, closed, solid, waiting, her heart beat faster as she reached it, locked, just like before. But this time she didn't pull away. Her mind went back to the booth again, to the hidden key. The way it had been placed carefully, almost like someone had expected this moment. She turned and walked quickly back down the hall, her pace picking up. The depot felt different now. Not empty. Not quiet in the way it had been when she first arrived. Now it felt like something was watching every step she took. She didn't look around. She didn't want to. She stepped back into the booth and went straight to the counter, crouching down and running her hand along the underside again. At first there was nothing, just rough wood and dust. Then her fingers brushed against something, another piece of tape. Her breath caught. Slowly she peeled it back, a second key. Smaller than the first one. Darker, almost worn smooth from use. Her pulse quickened as she held it up, staring at it in the fading light. "So you wanted this found?" she murmured. The thought made something shift inside her. Not fear this time, but something steadier. Someone had been here before her. Someone had figured something out, or at least tried to, and they had left a trail. For her or for whoever came next. She stood up quickly and turned back toward the hallway. This time she didn't stop. The floor creaked louder beneath her steps, the sound echoing through the depot as if the building itself was reacting to her movements. The light had dimmed even more now, shadows stretching longer along the walls. When she reached the locked door again, her hand didn't shake, not as much. She brought the smaller key up to the lock and paused for just a second. Then she pushed it in. It slid into place. Her breath caught again as she turned it. The lock gave way with a dull click. The sound felt heavier than it should have, like it carried something with it. For a moment, she just stood there. Then she pushed the door open. The room beyond was darker than she expected. Not completely black, but dim enough that it took a second for her eyes to adjust. A faint light filtered in through a small window on the far wall, just enough to outline the shapes inside. It wasn't a storage room, it was an office. Or at least it had been. A desk sat in the center, covered in dust, but still standing strong. Papers were scattered across it, some fallen to the floor over time. A chair was pushed back at an angle, like someone had stood up quickly and never returned. Her gaze moved slowly around the room. There were shelves along one wall, lined with old ledgers and books. A coat hung on a hook near the door, worn and stiff as if it had been left there for years. Everything felt paused, like time had stopped in this room and never started again. She stepped inside carefully. The floor creaked under her weight, but softer here, as if the room was holding its breath. Her eyes went to the desk. Something sat on top of it, not papers. Not dust, a photograph. She moved closer. It was old, the edges curled slightly, the image faded but still clear enough to make out. It showed the depot, just like it had been long ago. fresh paint, clean windows, people standing on the platform, and in the center of it, near the ticket booth, stood a figure. Her fingers tightened around the notebook as she leaned closer. There was something about the figure that felt familiar, not the face. She couldn't make that out clearly, but the stance. The way they stood, slightly turned, as if caught between leaving and staying. It sent a strange feeling through her chest. She shook her head slightly, trying to clear it. "This doesn't mean anything," she whispered. But the words didn't settle. Behind her, the door shifted, not fully closing. Just enough to make a sound. She turned quickly. The hallway beyond looked darker now, the light fading faster than she expected. Her heart started racing again. She stepped back toward the door, her instincts pulling her toward the exit, toward the open air outside. The warning in the notebook echoed in her mind again. Leave before nightfall. But as she reached the doorway, something made her stop. A sound, soft, close, not from the hallway. From inside the room? She turned slowly. The office hadn't changed. The desk, the shelves, the photograph, all the same. And yet it didn't feel the same. The air felt heavier, colder. Her gaze drifted back to the desk. The photograph was still there. But now it wasn't lying flat. It stood upright, propped against something that hadn't been there before. Her breath caught. She was sure of it. She hadn't touched it. Slowly, she stepped closer again, her heart pounding louder with every step. Behind the photograph, something was revealed. A small, hidden compartment built into the desk. Partially open, her hand trembled slightly as she reached out. Inside, she could see something tucked away, not papers this time. Not a notebook, something wrapped carefully in cloth. Her pulse quickened. Every instinct told her to stop, to walk away, to leave this place before whatever was happening went any further. But another voice pushed back. The same one that had brought her here? The same one that had made her buy a broken train depot with her last few dollars. She leaned forward, her fingers brushing against the edge of the compartment. Outside, the last of the daylight slipped behind the trees. The depot settled into shadow, and as she slowly pulled the cloth-wrapped object into the fading light, a sharp sound echoed from the hallway. Like footsteps. Coming closer? The sound came again, clearer this time. Footsteps, slow, steady, moving across the wooden floor outside the office. Her breath caught in her throat as she froze, the cloth-wrapped object still in her hands. Every instinct told her to run, to drop everything and get out while she still could. But her feet didn't move, not yet. The steps stopped just outside the doorway. Silence followed. Heavy and waiting. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it might give her away. She turned slowly, her eyes locking onto the dark hallway. The last bit of daylight had faded now, leaving only shadows stretching across the walls. "Who's there?" she asked, her voice unsteady but loud enough to carry. For a moment, nothing answered. Then, from the darkness, a voice, not loud, not threatening, just calm. "You found it." She blinked, her grip tightening on the bundle. "What?" she said, almost whispering now. The figure stepped forward slowly, just enough for the faint light from the office window to catch their outline. It wasn't what she expected. Not some stranger hiding in the depot, not someone dangerous. Just an older man. Worn coat, tired eyes, the kind of face that had seen too many years pass quietly. He raised his hand slightly, not in surrender but in reassurance. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said. "Been coming here a long time. Didn't think anyone else would show up." Her body didn't relax, but the sharp edge of fear softened just a little. "You were in here before?" she asked. He nodded. "Not today," he said, "but before." "Many times?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, her mind racing through everything she had seen, the letters, the notebook, the hidden keys. "That was you," she said. "The writing." "The notebook." He let out a slow breath and gave a small nod. "Part of it," he admitted. "Some of those pages are mine. Some belong to someone older than me." She stared at him, trying to piece it together. "What is this place?" she asked. "What's going on here?" He stepped a little closer, careful, giving her space. "It's not what you think," he said. "Or maybe it is, just not in the way those papers made it sound." Her grip on the cloth tightened. "Then explain it," she said. "Because none of this makes sense." He glanced at the object in her hands, then back at her. Go on, he said quietly. Open it. She hesitated. Then slowly she pulled back the cloth. Inside was a small metal box. Not fancy, not valuable at first glance. But when she lifted the lid, her breath caught. Photographs, dozens of them. Old ones, newer ones, all mixed together. People standing on the platform, smiling, working, waiting. Families, workers, travelers. Some dressed in clothes from decades ago, others much more recent, and tucked between them, letters. Not the same as the ones in the booth. These were different, more personal. She looked up, confused. What is this? She asked. The man stepped closer, his voice softer now. It's a record, he said, of everyone who came here when they had nowhere else to go. Her brow furrowed. I don't understand. He gave a small, tired smile. Neither did I at first, he said. I found this place years ago, same as you. Thought it was just an abandoned train depot. Thought I could use it, maybe fix it up a little. He looked around the room, his eyes lingering on the desk. But then I started finding things, he continued. Letters, notes, stories from people who passed through. Some stayed a night, some stayed longer. All of them left something behind. Her eyes drifted back to the photographs. They were hiding here? She asked. Not hiding, he said. Leaving a mark, this place. It became something else after the trains stopped running. A quiet place. A place for people who lost their way to stop for a while. She swallowed, the words settling slowly. And the strange things? She asked. The footsteps, the doors, the shadows? He let out a soft breath. An old building, he said. Wind through broken wood, loose boards. Your mind fills in the rest when you're alone too long. She stared at him. Part of her wanted to argue, but another part of her understood. She had been there before, alone long enough that every sound started to feel like something more. And the warning? She asked, lifting the notebook slightly. Leave before nightfall. His expression shifted, more serious now. That wasn't about fear, he said. That was about choice. She frowned. What do you mean? He took a step closer, his voice steady. People who stayed here too long, he said. They stopped moving on. This place is easy to get comfortable and quiet, forgotten, no one asking questions. No one expecting anything from you. Her chest tightened. That doesn't sound so bad, she said. He shook his head gently. It is if you never leave, he replied. This place isn't meant to keep people. It's meant to give them a moment to breathe, then send them back out. She looked down at the photographs again. At the faces, some smiling, some tired, all real. All these people, she said softly. They left? Most did, he said. A few came back over the years. Left more stories. Helped others who found their way here. Her mind spun, trying to take it all in. And you? She asked. He smiled faintly. I stayed longer than I should have, he admitted. Then I left, but I come back sometimes. To check on the place? To make sure it's still here for the next person who needs it. Silence settled between them. Not heavy this time. Just quiet. She looked around the office again, then back toward the booth, the waiting room, the empty tracks outside, her place. You knew someone would come? She asked. He nodded. Places like this don't stay empty forever, he said. She let out a slow breath. The fear that had wrapped around her when she first arrived began to loosen, replaced by something steadier, understanding. So what now? She asked. He looked at her, really looked this time. That's up to you, he said. You bought the depot. It's yours. She thought about that, about the cold nights, the empty streets, the feeling of having nowhere to belong. Then she looked at the photographs again, at the stories left behind. I think I know, she said quietly. He raised an eyebrow slightly. She met his gaze, a small but certain strength in her voice. I'm not leaving, she said. Not like that. Not yet. He watched her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Then don't stay stuck, he said. Build something. She gave a small smile. I will. The wind outside picked up again, softer this time, brushing against the depot like a quiet reminder. The place didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive in a different way. Not with shadows or fear, but with stories. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was standing at the end of something. She felt like she was at the beginning. The old train depot that cost $10 wasn't just a building anymore. It was a second chance. And this time, she wasn't going to let it slip away. Thanks for watching this story. Subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Tell me in the comments what you felt about this story and what kind of stories you want to see next.